The morning those bolt cutters bit into my barn padlock. The sound rang out so sharp in the Colorado frost, it might as well have been a dinner bell for federal charges. And when that old red door swung open, and Brenda Sterling's little burglary squad saw Sheriff David Bradley sitting inside on a hay bale with a hot cup of coffee and a warrant in his hand. I swear to you, I have never seen 3 grown adults turn the color of drywall so fast. 8 months of lies, forged paperwork, fake violations, and suburban empire building. All of it came crashing down at 5:47 in the morning because one HOA queen forgot the oldest rule in the book. If you're going to break into a man's family barn, maybe make sure he hasn't invited the law to breakfast. My name's Elias Vance. I'm 52 years old, electrician by trade. Recently divorced when all this started, and this land has been in my family since 1923. My grandfather bought these 15 acres back when this stretch of Colorado was still more cattle and wind than cul-de-sacs and decorative stone mailboxes. The farmhouse sits on a rise. The old red barn leans just enough to look honest, and there's an apple orchard off to the east that still gives decent fruit if the late frost doesn't get too ambitious. After the divorce, I moved back here because I needed quiet, needed work for my hands, needed somewhere that still felt real. I turned the barn into a woodworking shop and started building cabinets, tables, anything folks needed if they liked solid wood and didn't mind waiting for it to be done right. Most mornings, I'd sit on the porch with coffee, breathing in that smell of pine, old hay and mountain air, listening to meadowlarks and the far-off hum of Highway 36. And for a while there, life was simple. Then the developer came. By 2019, Mountain Vista Development had bought up the surrounding farmland and started turning 200 acres of open ground into a subdivision called Millbrook Estates. Row after row of beige houses with tiny backyards and names like Aspen Court and Elk Ridge Lane. Like slapping wilderness words on stucco would make it feel authentic. My 15 acres sat in the middle of all that, like a splinter they couldn't pull out. They tried to buy me, sure, offered decent money, too. But this place wasn't for sale. Never had been, never would be. That, apparently, irritated people. Once the homeowners moved in and formed their HOA, I started getting those letters. You know the kind? Thick paper, smug tone, community standards, neighborhood harmony. Property value protection. They wanted me to join, pay dues, follow rules, blend in. I laughed and burned the letters in the barrel behind the shop, watched the edges curl up and turn black next to cedar shavings and walnut dust. Looking back, that was probably when Brenda decided I'd become a project. She showed up one Tuesday morning in October, walking up my gravel drive in high heels that had no business being that far from polished flooring. Brenda Sterling, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Expensive suit, real estate smile, and that kind of voice that sounds sweet until you realize it's sharpened on purpose. She introduced herself as president of the Millbrook Estates HOA and told me we needed to discuss bringing my property into compliance with community standards. I set my coffee down and looked at her, really looked at her, and saw exactly what she was. New arrival. California money, energy. The sort of person who thinks old things are charming right up until those old things refuse to obey her. I told her, politely, that my property predated her subdivision. I wasn't part of her HOA, and the only standards I intended to comply with were county code and the law. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes got cold. 3 days later, I found the first violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox. Barn non-compliant. Gravel drive unapproved. Truck visible from road. Daily fines would begin immediately. Barn demolition or architectural remediation required. It was so ridiculous I almost admired the nerve of it. But then they kept coming. Every morning, another little bureaucratic love note dangling off my mailbox. $150 a day for the barn, $75 for the driveway, $54 truck visibility. By November, according to Brenda's fantasy accounting, I owed over $4,000 for the offensive living where my family had lived for a century. That would have been annoying enough on its own, but she didn't stop at paper. Oh no, Brenda was a full-spectrum nuisance. She turned the neighborhood Facebook group into her own propaganda channel, posting carefully angled pictures of my barn like it was a meth lab and talking about inconsistent visual standards and declining resale confidence. Strangers I'd never spoken to started commenting about my type of operation and whether my property attracted the wrong crowd. Let me back up a sec. There is a very specific kind of insult in being judged by people whose houses were built last Thursday, on land your grandfather once mowed with a tractor older than they are. Then came the first twist, the kind that makes a whole story shift under your feet. One morning, I was at the county recorder's office pulling the deed, mostly because I wanted to make sure I had every document lined up if I needed to sweat Brenda legally. I found the original deed language and nearly laughed myself stupid right there in the records room. My grandfather, God bless that stubborn genius, had retained the mineral rights not just to this 15 acres, but to the entire original 40-acre parcel he'd gradually sold off pieces of over the years, which meant every single house in Millbrook Estates was sitting on land where my family still owned what was underneath. Now, at first, that just felt satisfying. Then I did a little more digging and realized those mineral rights weren't symbolic. There was active lease interest in the area. Oil and gas money. Real money. Potential millions. Suddenly, Brenda's obsession with my property looked less like suburban snobbery and more like something uglier. I took the deed to Evelyn Reed, a property rights attorney in Boulder, and watching her read, it was like watching a woman unwrap Christmas in slow motion. She told me the HOA's so-called fines had no legal weight. The harassment angle was strong, and if they kept pushing, we could do real damage. So I posted a legal response online, citations and all, along with a tidy little note saying that, while they were busy whining about my barn paint, they might want to think harder about the fact their subdivision sat on my family's mineral rights. That blew the doors off. Some neighbors started asking questions. Nancy, retired school teacher with the eyes of a hawk and the patience of none, became one of my first allies. Richard, a veteran, built like a fence post and about as easy to move, started feeding me screenshots and chatter from inside the subdivision. And Brenda lost her mind just enough to get sloppy. She escalated into fraud by spring. First, it was a fake fire marshal inspection notice, saying my barn posed an immediate hazard and could be demolished. Something about the letter felt off. Nancy spotted the county seal looked pixelated, like somebody had stretched it off a cheap website. I ran the document metadata, and there it was. Created on a computer registered to be Sterling Real Estate Services. She had forged government paperwork on her own business machine. I mean, come on. That's not just illegal, that's lazy. Then I dug further and found her brother Gary Sterling tied to a development company that had been buying land around the county. That was the second twist, the one that made all the pieces click. Brenda wasn't just an HOA tyrant with too much time. She was part of a family plan. They wanted my land, or more accurately, they wanted me gone so they could get control of what sat underneath it. From there, it became a chess match. Only I had better records and less ego. I installed professional-grade security cameras, cloud backup, the whole thing. I had Deputy David Bradley from the sheriff's office over to document the harassment. And the man took notes like he was building a case for the apocalypse. He told me flat out this was targeted harassment and to keep everything. So I did. Brenda answered by getting more desperate. Fake legal letters from a retired attorney, altered surveys that magically moved my barn closer to the subdivision than it really was, anonymous complaints about my woodworking business, calls to clients, threats. Then one beautiful day, Evelyn Reed's deeper title research uncovered the real bombshell. My grandfather hadn't just kept rights under my 15 acres. The full 1923 deed attachments showed he retained mineral rights to the entire section. 640 acres. 640. By then, Gary's company had already filed exploratory paperwork to lease the same area. That was when the whole thing stopped being HOA nightmare and crossed into federal prosecutors are going to have a field day. We weren't talking about a petty board president anymore. We were looking at a coordinated attempt to pressure me off land tied to tens of millions in subsurface value. Evelyn Reed got almost cheerful when she realized how big it was. FBI got interested. Agent Carter got involved. Deputy David Bradley kept stacking evidence. Nancy organized neighbors. Richard started quietly tracking suspicious vehicles and late night meetings like he was running recon in a war zone. And then the Sterlings, because stupidity loves momentum, kept committing crimes. Gary cut my internet cables. Cameras got spray painted. Fake Yelp reviews hit my woodworking business. My mailbox got smashed. Somebody poisoned part of the orchard. Trail cams caught enough of it to build a movie. One audio pickup even caught Gary and Brenda talking near the property line about making life unbearable until he sells. That phrase alone probably bought them a few extra years of legal misery. By late summer, federal charges were already taking shape behind the curtain, but we needed the clean catch. The moment they committed the kind of undeniable, hand-on-the-doorknob crime no defense lawyer could pretty up, Brenda gave it to us herself. She cooked up a fake emergency county health inspection, complete with forged documents, fake badges, and a plan to enter my barn at dawn and discover hazardous materials they intended to plant. That was the move. Condemn the property, force remediation. Pressure sale, hand land control to Gary's company. Elegant in theory, idiotic in practice, because by then, Agent Carter, Deputy David Bradley, Evelyn Reed, Nancy, Richard, and I all knew exactly what they were planning. So we set the trap. I stayed in the farmhouse with eyes on the barn and a radio link. FBI sat in unmarked vehicles. Nancy and Richard had neighbors positioned with cameras. Evelyn Reed had civil filings ready to go. The second arrests were made, and inside the barn, Sheriff David Bradley waited with his coffee, his badge, and enough satisfaction in his face to keep me warm through winter. At 5:47 a.m., Brenda, Gary, and their third-rate accomplice showed up carrying bolt cutters, fake credentials, evidence bags, and all the confidence of people who thought they were the smartest criminals in the room. They cut the lock, opened the barn, and walked straight into the worst surprise of their adult lives. Sheriff David Bradley stood up, set the coffee cup down, and said, "Morning, folks. I don't suppose you have actual warrants for this inspection." The silence in that barn, man, you could hear the rafters thinking. Then FBI came through the side. Deputy David Bradley started reading rights. And Brenda's face. Lord, I wish I could frame that expression. 8 months of superiority draining out in one instant. All that performance, all that fake authority, all that arrogance, gone. By 7, my place looked like a news set. Denver crews, county officials, neighbors, everywhere. Evelyn Reed held a press conference on my front lawn and laid out the fraud conspiracy in language so clean and devastating it sounded like scripture. I got up there too, told everybody this land had been in my family 100 years, and any mineral revenue would go toward scholarships, conservation, and community benefit. Not greed, not intimidation, not strip malls in disguise. And that was the part I loved most. Brenda had spent all that time calling me a problem for the community. In the end, the community rallied around me because they finally understood who had been trying to rob whom. 6 months later, the convictions landed. Brenda got federal prison time for mail fraud and conspiracy. Gary got years for the enterprise side and restitution that probably still makes him sweat in his sleep. The HOA dissolved. A voluntary community association replaced it. The mineral lease deal brought in more money than I'd ever imagined. enough to fund scholarships, veteran training, conservation easements, and a foundation in my grandfather's name. The old barn still stands. Better roof now. Better locks, too. The orchard's recovering. Saturdays, people come out for coffee and property rights talks on the porch. Kids run around where Brenda once saw non-compliant structures. My workshop's busier than ever. And some mornings, when the light hits that weathered red siding just right, and the air smells like cut wood and coffee again, I sit there and think about how hard she fought to erase something she never understood. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When people abuse a little power for long enough, when they wrap greed in rules and call theft community improvement, what kind of justice actually fits the crime? Is it prison time, losing their money, public humiliation, or watching the place they tried to control become better without them? Drop your take, and if you've ever had an HOA, a developer, or some self-appointed neighborhood monarch come after your home, tell me your story too, because I promise you, Brenda wasn't the only one who learned the hard way that old land comes with old rights. And sometimes the man sitting quietly on the porch is the one holding the winning hand the whole time. If you believe justice always prevails, smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Conflict.